Hey there, guys. I was asked why I prefer the one arm, shoulder press over any other variation of overhead press. Now, when it comes to overhead pressing, there's a few different ways. Dumbbell, barbell, log, monster dumbbell as well, circus dumbbell, whatever you really want to muck around with. Then, in terms of strongman equipment. Now, I'll start with dumbbell overhead press. I prefer it because I can really concentrate on what I'm trying to work. And I've got a lot more freedom in terms of the range of motion and where my elbow sits in relation to my body versus, say, a barbell. You're very much fixed into a set bar path. Now, with the dumbbell one arm overhead press, there's a few other factors that come into play. As the weight gets heavier, you're going to naturally find that you're going to lean. Not that that's hard on your lower back. It's more you're trying to counterweight yourself versus the dumbbell. Like it's just you're moving significant load outside your center of gravity. You're going to have to change your body position in order to not fall over. With a barbell overhead press, that really doesn't come into effect anywhere near as much. And the same you could argue with a log or any of the strongman implements, with the exception of probably the monster dumbbell and the circus dumbbell. Now, when you're leaning off to the side, you're going to work your obliques really quite hard, and that's something that doesn't normally get worked with other variations of the overhead press, especially to the same extent. And the other thing that I like, with the dumbbell, I can press it out to the side. I don't have to lean back, so I've got no spinal extension. With a barbell overhead press, I find that I need to lean back a fair bit, and that's just so that I can get the bar, pressing up. My head's in the way of the range of motion. So, there's going to be a little bit of spinal extension, and it can, depending on the load, it will become more pronounced as the load increases. Spinal extension for me isn't a great situation to be in. Not because I'm prone to injury, but it's quite taxing on the lower back. And, if you are, a lifter that does experience a fair bit of lower back discomfort or pain due to other, anomalies and how you're put together, having that, degree of spinal extension or hyper, spinal extension will aggravate the lower back. A few times it has for me in the past. That's what naturally led me to think, okay, training shoulders, what's a better way of around it? So, I started to go more with the one arm overhead press. The other advantage that I found, with the one arm overhead press, hits the anterior delt, hits the medial and the rear deltoids quite well. So I can get all three done, which isn't something that I can do very well with the, standard barbell overhead press. I find it just really hits my anterior delts, and, that's sort of it when it comes to shoulder. Obviously, the medial and rear delts are still going to have a role to play, but I don't walk away with that even, total shoulder pump. Versus, if I chase the higher reps, have a bit more time under tension, things like that, after I finish the set, I can feel the entire shoulder has been worked thoroughly, like front to back. And if I get a decent amount of volume in as well, like the pump is almost painful, and you can't really tell like what part is hurting more just because it's so pumped. And there's no damage to the tissue. It's so pumped full of blood. And I find, it works really well. The other advantage that I have, with the one arm overhead press is I get to directly see, which shoulder is stronger and where I'm lacking in terms of like mobility, or, just weaknesses from a stability standpoint. My right side's always done better, and that's just more because of, mobility, and I'm right-handed. My left sometimes, will be a little bit compromised. It's just not as stable. So if I'm ending up with a potential shoulder injury, it always sort of flags itself first in the one arm overhead press. And that happened, this week, for example. I took the weight up on the right side. I was able to get 20 reps. On the left, it just didn't feel comfortable. Everything felt slow. I only got 8 reps, and it's like, I'm just going to call this a set. I waited a few minutes, did another set, got 12 reps. And it's like, look, I'm not injured yet, and yet is the key word. But it's like, this coming week, I need to take it as a deload. Shoulders have already flagged to me, especially on the left, that they're not quite happy, something's not either recovering well, or something else is out of balance. So I like it from that standpoint as I get feedback. The other advantage is, with the one arm overhead press and having each scapula then having to be stabilized by the upper back, that carries across for me onto my competition bench press. So, I get to really retract my scapula, set my chest up nice and high, and I can bench press really well. And as a result, I've got a really good bench press, but I've also got a really stable upper back and healthy shoulders, which, thankfully I haven't run into any big shoulder issues or tricep issues, so far competing in powerlifting. And, this is my 18th year in the sport. So I'd almost, argue that, the one arm overhead press is just a great prehab exercise as well. You can definitely use it as a mass builder, but I prefer to keep the reps on the higher end, 15 to 20 reps. And that's simply because, bench pressing heavy, the anterior delt or the shoulder as a whole is being heavily loaded. The last thing that I want in my training is 2 heavy shoulder days. I'd rather have, the heavy bench press, aka shoulder day, if you want to call that, on the Monday, and then later in the week on the Thursday or the Friday, chase the higher reps with the overhead press and work the shoulder through a different range of motion and a different plane as well. In terms of sets and reps, for shoulders and the one arm overhead press, 4 sets for me I find was ideal. Reps 15 to 20, and that just worked really well, especially if I had 2 top sets or a single top set, and then drop the weight back a little bit and still pushed myself really quite hard. I wasn't worried about getting injured. I get a really good pump in my core as well. I get that lateral flexion and extension. So each side, the reciprocal inhibition, I get a lot out of the one arm overhead press compared to the traditional barbell arm press. And the other thing is, because I've got no spinal extension, or very, very minimal spinal extension on the one arm press, it then means when I go to squat or deadlift, my lower back is still fresh. Or if it slightly hurt my lower back, it doesn't heavily impact my one arm press as long as the reps are sort of in that 15 to 20 rep range. If I was trying to hit 10 reps, then that'd be a different story. But again, anyone that's injured their lower back is going to have a hard time performing any sort of movement regardless, because your lower back is injured. Versus this, the lateral flexion and extension I find is very easy on the spine. So I keep that in mind as well. Because when you're training a muscle group, you also need to factor it into the rest of your total training program. There's no point in just specializing in one area at the cost of everything else. So for me, fortunately, the one arm shoulder press seems to fit that bill really well. It's just an exercise that is tolerated well, has a high carryover into multiple lifts, but also then acts as a prehab exercise as well. In terms of total shoulder sessions, normally just one standalone, with the bench press being, shoulders as well. So shoulders get hit twice a week, effectively. If you guys have any questions, feel free to comment below. Otherwise, have a great day wherever you are.